In my 40 years on the bench, I've seen people come into my courtroom thinking the law is a suggestion, something that applies to everybody else. But this case stayed with me because the defendant didn't just misunderstand the seriousness of what she'd done. She laughed at it. She treated a courtroom like a comment section. And when I realized she'd been posting about the case online, calling it nothing, I knew I had a responsibility to teach a lesson that would last longer than any fine. When this case landed on my desk, it didn't look like the kind of file that would end up being one of those days people talk about for years. At first glance, it was a set of charges that on paper people might dismiss as a scuffle or a misunderstanding. But I've been doing this long enough to know something. The paper doesn't tell you the whole story. People do. The defendant was Brianna Hale, 21 years old. I'm not going to pretend wealth doesn't change the way some people move through the world, because it does. Her father owned a chain of local commercial properties. She arrived with counsel, dressed like she was attending a brunch, not court. The victim was Mr. Raymond Keller, 68 years old, a retired city worker, a grandfather, the kind of man who's worked his whole life and doesn't ask for attention. He was working part-time as a parking attendant at a small private lot downtown, one of those jobs people don't notice until they want something. What concerned me most wasn't just the charge itself. It was the pattern I saw in the report: entitlement, escalation, and then a cold kind of indifference afterward, like the victim's dignity didn't count. And in my courtroom, dignity always counts. Here's what happened that afternoon, as I came to understand it from the evidence. It was early evening, and the downtown area was busy. According to witnesses, Mr. Keller was standing by the entrance to the lot wearing a reflective vest, doing exactly what he was hired to do: directing cars, collecting the fee, keeping traffic moving. Brianna pulled in driving an expensive SUV. The report said she wanted to park without paying, not because she didn't have the money, because in her mind she shouldn't have to. Mr. Keller told her politely, "Ma'am, it's $10. That's it, $10. Not a lecture, not an insult, just the rule." And according to the witness statements, that's when her tone changed. She said, "Do you know who my father is?" Now, I've heard that line in one form or another for decades. Let me tell you something. The law doesn't care who your father is. The law cares what you did. Here's what happened that afternoon, as I came to understand it from the evidence. It was early evening, and the downtown area was busy. According to witnesses, Mr. Keller was standing by the entrance to the lot wearing a reflective vest, doing exactly what he was hired to do: directing cars, collecting the fee, keeping traffic moving. Brianna pulled in driving an expensive SUV. The report said she wanted to park without paying, not because she didn't have the money, because in her mind she shouldn't have to. Mr. Keller told her politely, "Ma'am, it's $10. That's it, $10. Not a lecture, not an insult, just the rule." And according to the witness statements, that's when her tone changed. She said, "Do you know who my father is?" Now, I've heard that line in one form or another for decades. Let me tell you something. The law doesn't care who your father is. The law cares what you did. Mr. Keller didn't argue with her. He just repeated the same thing. "Ma'am, it's $10. The security footage showed her stepping out of the vehicle. Not calmly, sharply. You could see her pointing. Her posture wasn't confusion, it was challenge. Witnesses reported she said something like, "I'm not paying for this dump," and one witness described Mr. Keller as keeping his hands down, staying back, trying to de-escalate. That's what responsible adults do. But she didn't want calm, she wanted control. And then in the footage, it happened. She moved toward him, and when he raised one arm, not to hit her, but to create space, she slapped him. Not a tap, a slap with force. At 68 years old, that kind of strike isn't drama. It's dangerous. People fall. People hit their head. People don't get back up the way they used to. Mr. Keller staggered. He didn't swing back. He didn't curse her out. He looked stunned, like a man trying to understand how a human being could do that over $10. And what I remember thinking sitting in my chambers watching that video was simple. This wasn't about money. This was about respect. Here's what happened that afternoon, as I came to understand it from the evidence. It was early evening and the downtown area was busy. According to witnesses, Mr. Keller was standing by the entrance to the lot wearing a reflective vest, doing exactly what he was hired to do, directing cars, collecting the fee, keeping traffic moving. Brianna pulled in driving an expensive SUV. The report said she wanted to park without paying. Not because she didn't have the money, because in her mind, she shouldn't have to. Mr. Keller told her politely, "Ma'am, it's $10. That's it, $10. Not a lecture, not an insult, just the rule." And according to the witness statements, that's when her tone changed. She said, do you know who my father is?" Now, I've heard that line in one form or another for decades. Let me tell you something. The law doesn't care who your father is. The law cares what you did. Mr. Keller didn't argue with her. He just repeated the same thing. "Ma'am, it's $10. The security footage showed her stepping out of the vehicle. Not calmly, sharply. You could see her pointing. Her posture wasn't confusion, it was challenge. Witnesses reported she said something like, "I'm not paying for this dump," and one witness described Mr. Keller as keeping his hands down, staying back, trying to de-escalate. That's what responsible adults do. But she didn't want calm, she wanted control. And then in the footage, it happened. She moved toward him, and when he raised one arm, not to hit her, but to create space, she slapped him. Not a tap, a slap with force. At 68 years old, that kind of strike isn't drama. It's dangerous. People fall. People hit their head. People don't get back up the way they used to. Mr. Keller staggered. He didn't swing back. He didn't curse her out. He looked stunned, like a man trying to understand how a human being could do that over $10. And what I remember thinking, sitting in my chambers watching that video, was simple. This wasn't about money. This was about respect. As I continued reviewing the evidence, the case became clearer and worse. There were multiple witness statements, and what stood out was how consistent they were. Different people, different vantage points, same description. Mr. Keller stayed calm, and Brianna escalated. One witness said she was recording him on her phone while yelling, like she wanted her own version of the story ready to post before the truth could catch up. The medical report indicated bruising on the left cheek and tenderness along the jaw. Nothing life-threatening, thank God. But I've learned over the years that we don't measure harm only in stitches and x-rays. Humiliation is harm too. After the slap, the footage showed Brianna walking back to her SUV like nothing happened. That's the part that sat heavy with me. When someone makes a mistake and immediately realizes it, when they look shocked at their own behavior. You can work with that. You can teach. You can rehabilitate. But indifference is harder. Police were called, and by the time an officer arrived, she was still on scene, arguing. The report said she told the officer it was a misunderstanding and that Mr. Keller was being aggressive. But the video didn't show that. The video showed an older man doing his job and a young woman refusing to accept the word no. And as I looked at that evidence, I had to ask myself, what happens if the court treats this like a minor inconvenience? Because when the system shrugs, certain people learn a dangerous lesson, that consequences are optional. In my courtroom, I don't allow that lesson. By the time this case came to my courtroom, the public already had opinions. My clerk mentioned that snippets of the incident were circulating online. People were commenting, sharing, arguing, some demanding harsh punishment, others dismissing it as not a big deal. I understand the world we live in now. A moment happens, and within minutes it's on somebody's feed with a caption and a soundtrack. And suddenly, everybody's a judge. But let me tell you how I approach it. Whether 8 people saw it or 8 million, my responsibility doesn't change. Social media doesn't write the sentence. The facts do, the law does, and the person standing in front of me does. Still, what worried me was this. When someone goes online and mocks the process, when they treat court like content, they're not just disrespecting the victim. They're disrespecting the idea that we live in a society where disputes are settled by law, not by impulse. And I've been on this bench long enough to know when you normalize disrespect, you normalize cruelty. When Brianna walked into my courtroom, I watched her closely, not to judge her clothes, not to judge her background, but to judge what matters in court, her attitude toward what she'd done. She came in smiling, almost like she was amused by the whole thing. Her attorney did most of the talking at first, the way lawyers do, trying to frame it as minor, trying to push it into the box of youthful mistake and no serious injury. And I understand advocacy. That's their job. But I looked at Brianna and I said, Miss Hale, do you understand why you're here today? She said, because this got blown out of proportion. I paused. I've learned that silence in a courtroom can do more than shouting ever could. I let her words sit in the air. Then I said, Miss Hale, an older man was struck while doing his job. Help me understand how that's out of proportion. She shrugged, and said, it was a slap. He's fine. That's when I felt something inside me tighten. Not anger, disappointment. The kind of disappointment you feel when you see a young person choosing arrogance over accountability. I said, Miss Hale, you don't get to decide what harm is. The person who suffered it decides, and the law considers it. Her attorney tried to interrupt, gently, professionally, saying they were prepared to resolve it with a fine. A small fine. The kind of number someone like her could pay without blinking. And Brianna, right on cue, laughed, just a short laugh, and said, if it's just a fine, I'll pay it right now. I looked at her and I said, Miss Hale, this is not a drive-through window. You don't purchase your way out of accountability. I could see people in the gallery shift. Mr. Keller was there, sitting quietly, dressed neatly. His cheeks still had discoloration. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. I turned to him and I said, Mr. Keller, thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience. Would you like to speak? He stood slowly, and you could tell he wasn't a man who wanted the spotlight. He said, Judge, I've worked my whole life. I don't want trouble. But I've never been hit like that, especially not while I was just doing my job. I went home, and my grandkids asked me what happened. I didn't know what to tell them. That broke my heart, because there's a quiet dignity in that kind of statement. He wasn't asking me to ruin her life. He was asking me to recognize his humanity. I nodded and said, Mr. Keller, you deserve better than that. Then I looked back at Brianna. I said, and Miss Hale, did you hear him? You embarrassed him in front of strangers, and then he had to explain bruises to his grandchildren. Do you have anything you want to say to him? She glanced at her attorney and said, I'm sorry he feels that way. I shook my head. Oh, no, that's not an apology. That's a negotiation. I said, Miss Hale, the words you're looking for are, I'm sorry for what I did. Not, I'm sorry you feel. One is accountability. The other is avoidance. Her face hardened. Okay, I'm sorry. Happy? I took a breath, composed myself. I've been doing this long enough to know that if I let my personal reaction lead, I lose what a judge is supposed to be, steady. I said, Miss Hale, I'm not here to collect a performance. I'm here to determine whether you understand the seriousness of striking an elderly person. Then my bailiff brought something to my attention, quietly, respectfully, a printout. I asked, what is that? He told me it was a screenshot publicly posted of a message Brianna had put online the night before. I looked at it carefully, and then I looked up at her. I said, Miss Hale, did you post online about this case? She rolled her eyes. Everyone posts. It's not a big deal. I said, what did you post? She hesitated. Nothing important. So I read it, right there in open court, because she had made it public and because it spoke directly to her attitude. I said, it says, court tomorrow. Old guy's dramatic. Judge will probably act like it's the end of the world, LOL. The courtroom went still. I looked at Brianna and I said, Miss Hale, do you know what troubles me the most about that? Not that you used LOL, not that you tried to be funny. It's that you reduced a human being's pain to content. I let that sink in. Then I said, social media has taught some people that if you laugh at something, it stops being serious. But the bruises on Mr. Keller's face don't disappear because you made a joke online. Her attorney tried to shift again, offering restitution, community service, anger management. Those are appropriate tools in a lot of cases, and I consider them. I don't just punish, I try to correct. So I asked Brianna, "Do you work?" She said, "Yeah, not right now." I said, "Yeah, have you ever worked a job where strangers talk down to you?" She said, I don't see what that has to do with anything." I nodded slowly. "It has everything to do with it." I said, "Why? Because if you had, you might understand what it means to stand there doing your job and be treated like you don't matter." Then I asked her, "Why didn't you just pay the $10? She said, "Because he was rude." I said, "The video does not show him being rude. It shows him enforcing a rule, and you didn't like being told no." Her jaw tightened. "So what, you're taking his side?" I said, "Miss Hale, I'm taking the side of the evidence." And then I played the video in court. I watched her while it played. Some defendants can't look at themselves. Some cry. Some put their head down. Those are signs sometimes that the conscience is alive. Brianna watched it like it was a clip someone else made, detached. When it ended, I said, "Miss Hale, do you deny that you struck him?" She said no, but I held up my hand. There is no but that turns a slap into respect. Then I turned to Mr. Keller again. I said, "Mr. Keller, I want you to know that in this courtroom, your work matters. Your age does not make you a target. It makes you deserving of more respect, not less." And finally, I looked back at Brianna, and I could see it. She still believed this would end the way many things probably ended in her life, with someone smoothing it over. That's when I knew my decision had to be firm, measured, and educational. Because sometimes the greatest kindness a court can deliver is a consequence that wakes someone up. I've been on this bench long enough to know that sentences should do more than punish. They should protect the public, acknowledge the victim, and give the defendant a real chance to become better. I looked at Brianna and I said, "Miss Hale, I want you to understand something." I paused. "I've been a judge for 40 years. I've seen thousands of defendants. Some are remorseful, some are scared, some made mistakes and learned from them." I let that sit, then I continued. "You posted online that Mr. Keller is dramatic and that I would act like it's the end of the world." I shook my head. "Let me tell you what's not dramatic. A 68-year-old man going home with bruises because you didn't want to hear the word no. Let me tell you what's not funny. Someone doing honest work being treated like trash." Then I said the words I needed her to hear. "Miss Hale, respect is not optional. Accountability is not negotiable, and money is not a substitute for character. Here's what I ordered: realistic, lawful, and focused on changing behavior. I said, I'm entering a conviction consistent with the evidence, and I'm imposing the following conditions. First, you will pay restitution for Mr. Keller's medical evaluation and any related costs. Second, you will complete 80 hours of community service, and it will not be at a charity gala or an office. It will be in a setting where you serve the public, so you learn what it means to treat strangers with dignity. Third, you will complete an approved anger management and impulse control program, and you will provide proof of completion to this court. Fourth, you will have no contact with Mr. Keller and you will stay away from that property. And finally, if you violate these conditions, the court will revisit this sentence and the consequences will escalate." Then I looked right at her. "This sentence is not about humiliating you. You humiliated yourself. This is about teaching you what you should have learned long ago, that other people are not obstacles in your life. They are human beings." And I said, "I hope you use this to become someone your family can be proud of. Because today, Miss Hale, you were not." After I delivered the sentence, the courtroom felt different. The laughter was gone. The casual confidence was gone. Brianna's face finally changed, like reality had arrived and sat down next to her. Her attorney leaned in and spoke quietly to her. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't nodding because she understood everything I said. She was nodding because she realized she couldn't buy her way out of it. Mr. Keller remained composed. That's what impressed me. Some people, after being wronged, want vengeance. He didn't. He just wanted recognition that what happened to him mattered. As court ended, he approached the bench area with permission. He didn't grandstand. He just said, "Thank you, Judge." And I told him the truth. I said, "Mr. Keller, thank you for showing up, for doing your job with dignity, for reminding everyone here what quiet strength looks like." Later, I spoke with my staff. I told them, "This is why we do what we do, not for the noise outside the courtroom, not for the comments, for the people who get hurt and think nobody will take it seriously." And yes, people talked about the case afterward. People always do. But I didn't measure the day by whether strangers approved of me. I measured it by whether a man who had been disrespected left my courtroom knowing the system saw him. That's the standard I hold myself to after 40 years and as long as I'm blessed to sit on that bench. Let me tell you what I hope people learn from this case. First, social media isn't real life. Laughing online doesn't erase responsibility offline. If you mock consequences, you don't cancel them. You just prove you're not ready to face them. Second, the way you treat working people, the attendants, the clerks, the guards, the cashiers, tells the truth about your character. And the way you treat the elderly tells the truth about your soul. In my courtroom, I don't care who your family is, what you drive, or how many followers you have. What matters is how you behave when someone tells you no. Because at the end of the day, we're all accountable to the same law, and we're all responsible for the way we treat each other. That's what justice means to me. And after 40 years on this bench, that's what I still believe.